Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us. A big welcome back to all of our clients and partners who are joining us again for the third webinar in our Understanding the New Normal series. And also hello and welcome to everyone who's joining us for the first time. My name is Richard McLeod. I'm a Senior Client and Strategy Director for Metrics Lab based here in the UK. And I'm joined by Bish Chatterjee, a Director in our Singapore business. We'll be presenting for around 30 minutes or so, so that should leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end for some Q&A. So if any questions do come to mind as we run through the session, please pop them into the questions box, which you should find on the right-hand side of your page, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. Also worth me saying that we will be sending a copy of this report to everyone following the session. So if we can start by just casting our minds back to last month's webinar and our findings from May, a number of key themes emerged that I think it's just useful for me to quickly recap. So first of all, we saw a growing acceptance from people that we have a long road ahead of us. The recovery may not be as quick as people initially hoped. Secondly, we saw concerns over household finances beginning to actually supersede fears about the disease itself. And in that context, brands were coming under increasing scrutiny to provide more value and support for consumers. And finally, we identified that emotional needs were evolving as we move through different phases of the pandemic. And this has big implications for brands and how they engage with people. Our focus this month is to continue to monitor the evolution of some of these big prevalent themes, but also we are trying to be quite agile. So we're looking to focus on new areas as the situation evolves and new client questions emerge. Today, we're addressing 3 core questions. So first of all, how far from normal are we? Are people still feeling cautious? Are they still expecting a long road ahead? Secondly, how are priorities changing? So here, we're actually looking to zoom into the topic specifically of sustainability. Does that remain a priority, or is it being displaced by other concerns such as value and safety? And we know this is a big question that a lot of our clients are asking. And finally, as priorities and needs continue to shift, how do brands continue to play a positive role and communicate meaningfully? And ultimately, we believe that there are still significant opportunities for brands to connect with people in positive ways. I won't dwell for too long on the method. There were just a couple of points I wanted to draw your attention to. So first of all, the information that we're sharing today was collected in June. It's very important to us that we are providing a holistic perspective. So that means that we're combining survey data from our tracking program with social insights, trusted external data sources, and inspiring brand case studies. That 360 view we feel is crucial because it allows us to understand what people are feeling and how they're behaving, but also where can brands intersect. We're covering 17 markets, so that gives us very good geographical coverage, but also I think a really nice range of different countries where the pandemic is at very different life stages. Those cross-country comparisons are really useful because it gives us a sense of how the situation is likely to evolve over time. So let's now head into the findings, and we'll start with a perspective around how far from normality people think we are. This is really a core metric for us, something that we track and monitor on a monthly basis, and really it's an important gauge of overall sentiment and confidence. So we begin by asking to what extent people feel that life is already returning to normal. We can read this chart from left to right. So the further to the right-hand side a country flag is, the closer to normality the people in that country feel they already are. Overall, we continue to see real progress as people around the world feel that we are progressing closer towards normality. And that global average across our 17 countries has increased by a further 6 percentage points this month. There is, though, still a big range across our countries. And again, Asian countries continue to lead the way. China, Vietnam, followed by Thailand and Indonesia, these are the countries that currently feel closest to normality. At the other end of the spectrum, we have Brazil. Brazil is in a very different situation. Unfortunately, both cases and deaths continue to rise in Brazil, and that's in the context of huge criticism of the government. That means that Brazil is now the country that feels furthest away from normal, and we are seeing month-on-month declines in consumer confidence in that country. Overall, though, it remains clear that whilst this is, of course, a global crisis, the situation around the world is hugely fragmented, and it's changing all the time. So in that context, businesses that can be agile, businesses that can change quickly and respond differently within different countries, these are the businesses that are best placed to succeed. However, despite this overall sense of progress, we do also continue to see a rising acceptance of a long road ahead. So when we began this programme 3 months ago, back in April, half of people globally felt that there would be a return to normality within 3 months. Now, unfortunately, that early optimism has proven to be misplaced. Since then, we have seen monthly declines in the number of people thinking that there will be a return to normal within that time frame. And actually in June, that's dropped to 1/3 of people globally thinking there will be a return to normal within the next 3 months. We are seeing this happening across lots of different countries in lots of different situations. So if we take China, for example, China, of course, we know is one of our leading markets in this context, a country where consumers are feeling particularly confident. Even here, we are seeing a rising acceptance that the road to recovery is likely to be a marathon rather than a sprint. So this is going to have a huge impact on people's mindsets, their behaviours, and their routines as they brace themselves for this marathon. And that means there is a really big role to play for brands to support people and to make people's lives easier during this prolonged crisis. And I think this is reflected in this rising sense of cautious optimism that we see around the world. So as people do think that we are slowly progressing back towards normality, we do see a lot of these negative emotions slowly subsiding. And in June, we have seen significant drops in emotions like caution and anxiety. But this is not yet translating into significant increases in those more positive emotions. So we have seen some incremental rises in emotions like contentment and positivity, but nothing overly dramatic. Again, this reinforces the idea that people are realizing that we're not quite in the clear yet. And that means it's really important for brands to strike the right chord emotionally. Now is not the time for overly joyful or celebratory communications heralding a new dawn. And that's simply because people don't think we're there yet. So with people in this frame of mind, we wanted to understand and monitor what are people looking forward to. And in the last couple of months, we have consistently seen that reconnecting with loved ones is really a key milestone that lots of people are looking forward to. And in June, this remains something that lots of people are very excited about. But as restrictions continue to relax and it is becoming easier to see people, this is no longer the #1 thing that people are looking forward to on our list. Domestic travel has now emerged as the #1 activity that people are looking forward to. International travel, of course, is still very, very difficult for most people around the world. So for now, traveling domestically really is seen as a key milestone on that road to recovery. And at the same time, we are seeing lots of governments putting packages in place to really stimulate domestic tourism. So in Thailand, for example, we've seen the Thai government investing large sums of money to incentivize domestic travel as a remedy to that devastating loss of foreign tourism that Thailand has suffered. And of course, we know how important tourism is to the Thai economy. But we're seeing the same thing happening in lots of countries around the world as well. So for brands, all of these things are still really important milestones. They're small wins to celebrate on that road to recovery. And that means it's really crucial for brands to stay close to how priorities are shifting within this space. But another crucial question is actually how confident are people in doing these activities? So again, we read this chart from left to right. And the further to the right-hand side an activity is, the more confident people are about doing these activities again. So that means that people are more confident about going to pubs and bars, getting their hair cut and going to restaurants, and much less confident about traveling to new countries and going on holiday abroad. But I think what's really interesting to note here is the changes in confidence that we see month on month. And not all of these changes are positive. So last month, we saw that getting your hair cut was actually the #1 thing that people were looking forward to and feeling confident about. 1 month later, and people are actually losing confidence in this activity. And that coincides with a number of media reports challenging the safety of going to salons, even with lots of safety precautions in place. This is something that we anticipate will continue. We will see this tension between things that people are missing, things that people are very, very keen to do, but also at the same time, doubt re-emerging about whether they are safe, and also whether safety precautions actually undermine the experience. So ultimately, this volatility is increasingly defining our framework for the journey towards the new normal. And what we are increasingly finding is that the path towards the new normal is unlikely to be a linear march forwards. So this restricted living phase that we are now in is very, very complex. It's changing very quickly, and there are going to be setbacks along the way. Of course, this makes things incredibly complicated for brands. And we think the crucial thing here is for businesses to really keep their finger on the pulse of how conditions are changing specifically within each country, and then how this influences people's needs, their priorities, their attitudes, and ultimately brand activities need to adapt to reflect these changes. So now I'll hand you over to Bish. Bish is going to talk us through how these priorities are changing, with a particular focus on the role of sustainability, and ultimately how should brands be adapting.
Perfect. Thanks, Rich. All right, so hopefully everyone can see my slideshow. So yeah, with the setup that, the informative setup that Rich has talked about, which is how close to normal do people feel that they are, what activities are they confident of doing, not so confident of doing. What's critical is we take a look at in the next couple of sections, how are people's worries changing? As in, are there priorities or worries that come to the forefront? Are there worries that go, to the back of the line? So we'll take a look at that. What we'll also see is how does all of that impact something, an important topic that a lot of clients have been asking us, which is around sustainability, and whether there's an impact on the overall topic of sustainability. And that's what we'll look through in the next couple of sections. So what we start off with is essentially a look on whether people's incomes have declined versus the past month or not. Now, all of you who were with us in the last webinar, in the May data, you would have seen that that number was a startling 40%. That number now has gone down to about 32%. It's a significant decline, but that still is a pretty significant number. So 1 out of 3 people globally are saying that their incomes continue to decline compared to the last month. And what you do see is that there's a very big disparity between countries in this regard. So a country like Indonesia, Thailand, that number is as high as 3 out of 5 people. And these economies are dependent on the informal sector, dependent on contract-based labor. So clearly these economies are yet to come out of the starting blocks and give people that back to normality when it comes to their profession and incomes. You got Saudi Arabia, a country that's highly dependent on oil exports. They've been hit hard by the decrease in crude oil prices. The local oil export companies, they are cutting jobs, cutting costs, clearly having an impact on the Saudi population. So on one hand, you've got these countries where the proportion of people with an income decline is even higher. And on the other hand, you've got some countries like Australia and a few more developed economies in Western Europe, like the Netherlands and Germany, where the number of people with income declines is not as high. So you see there is a bit of disparity depending on geographies. Now, what does happen is, given that 1 out of 3 people are saying that my income has declined versus last month, you see that my household finances is now the #1 priority or the #1 worry on people's minds. It has overtaken my family's physical health over the last 3 months, and that's not a surprise because with largely stabilizing infections and decreasing deaths in most countries, some countries still continue on that front. The priority or the worry around my family's physical health has stabilized and continues to decline month on month. The other interesting bit to also notice is the state of global politics. Now, be it the American presidential elections, be it the status and impact of Brexit, relationships of different countries with China. All of these are playing a role in people's minds, and they are getting more and more conscious and worried about what the state of global politics is. When we monitor, again, this is data from our social insights stream around what the top hashtags are across markets, and we've picked two countries, the US and the UK here. You see that online conversations have a huge sort of array of topics being covered right now. You've got obviously COVID related topics, be it health hazards, be it infections, be it impact on finances. Then you've got social equality movements like Black Lives Matter, which has also come to the forefront in terms of online conversations. And of course, like we've seen, the whole bit around global politics. So again, presidential elections, Brexit, all of these are certainly topics that are being discussed pretty widely by people. Now, what that points to is a great deal of noise in the system. That clearly there are a number of topics that people are putting forth their opinion out there on the internet and tweeting about and talking about. In this round, what we thought was we'll do an interesting cluster of markets. So we said, okay, how can we group some of these markets together? So what we did is we used two data points. The first one from Oxford University, which basically grades the countries on the level of lockdown rollback. So to what degree the restrictions have been eased, to what degree, you've got freedom of movement going out and the economy opening up. And we've used the data that Rich was talking about, which is how close to normal do consumers feel. Using these two, we came up with three clusters. The first we call leading edge. These are countries where the economy is opened up a fair bit and people are fairly confident in terms of how close to normal they are, symbolized by countries like Australia, China, Vietnam. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got the countries that we are calling not ready. So countries like Brazil, US, UK, where severe restrictions continued in June and people did not feel they were as close to normal as well. And then you've got sort of the middle bucket, which is the getting ready bucket. So countries like France, India, Italy, Spain, who fall in that bucket, which we feel will more often than not, move into the leading edge bucket maybe in the next month or two, depending on the situation. So these are the three clusters we came up with. And as you attend more of our webinars, you will see month on month, we use this as an analysis lens. So for this month, one angle that we looked at was how do the worries evolve across these three buckets? And what we see is a very interesting phenomenon. As you move up from not ready to getting ready to leading edge, the worries around my family's physical health stabilizes or declines slightly. What does happen is you see a surge in the worries around my household finances. So as people move past the physical danger, my thoughts around, okay, I need to keep myself and my family safe from the virus. And as that thought goes to the back of the line, what you're now thinking about is, okay, I need to ensure that I have a sustainable flow of income in the near term and the longer term. So clearly you see that the worry around household finances goes up leaps and bounds as countries move into the leading edge cluster. Now, with that context, you've got worries around finances that are still at play. You've got worries around physical health still at play. We've seen the amount of noise in the system with people talking about a variety of topics. What we wanted to see was, okay, so what's happening to sustainability? Is that still a priority? Are people still talking about it? Should companies continue to invest as much into sustainability? So the first thing that we look at is we ask people to what degree they agree with some of these statements to gauge whether, are they concerned about the environment or not. So the buckets that you see on how people are adapting, you've got people who are saying, clearly there is this whole health and hygiene bucket. So people are aware of the hygiene, they're eating healthy, so they agree with that. They claim that they're also seeking out value. So they are clearly seeking out, the trade-off between value-led products and expensive products potentially. And what they also claim is that they are more concerned about the environment right now and more aware of environmentally friendly products. Again, just to reiterate, this is consumer claim. They claim that they are as concerned about the environment. When we ask them a behavior-led question and we ask them to do sort of a trade-off, we tell them that, okay, if you had to prioritize between better value products and environmental concerns, which one would you prioritize? If you had to prioritize between safe and healthy products over environmental concerns, which one would you prioritize? And in both cases, you see them deprioritizing environmental concerns. When it comes to value, that's more the case for people whose incomes have declined, and that's understandable. When it comes to safe and healthy products, that's sort of an all-pervasive trend where people are saying that I will prioritize safe and healthy products over environmental concerns, which means I might very well use use and throw mask because I think it keeps me safe, but I'm not as bothered about what the impact it will have on the environment because of this habit of mine. So again, from a claim perspective, they've said I am concerned about the environment. From a trade-off perspective, clearly they are deprioritizing environmental concerns. This deprioritization of environmental concerns is also visible in online conversations. So we've brought the UK online trends here for everyone. We've compared this with the US and a couple of other markets, and it's a consistent trend across all of the markets. So I'll draw your attention to the gray arrow, which sort of is around mid-March, around when the pandemic hit most of the countries. You see the levels at which people were talking about topics like sustainability, environment, climate was fairly high. As soon as the pandemic hit, there is a fairly visible drop in the level of these conversations. There still is some conversations on sustainability being led by key consumer groups like environmental activists, scientists, etc., who are talking about the impact of single-use plastic, but clearly it is not at the level it was pre-COVID. Hence, going back to this framework that Rich referred to in his part of the section, which was, so what exactly is happening to sustainability? And as Matrix Lab, our point of view is that sustainability will continue to be an important topic in the long run. Just that right now, at this very moment, clearly it is being superseded by a lot more pressing priorities. Now, be it concerns around the impact or the worries on finances because of COVID, health hazards, topics around politics, social equality movements like Black Lives Matters, there is a lot of noise in the system which seems to supersede sustainability at this point in time. Hence, as we emerge from restricted living into recovery living and finally emerge in the new normal, we do expect sustainability to come back out to the table with even renewed vigor. With that, I hand it back to Rich, who will talk us through some interesting examples and inspiring examples of how brands have been talking to consumers right now.
Thank you, Bish. Exactly. In our final chapter, we'll be looking specifically at how brands can evolve their communications approach, specifically with this lens of how emotional needs are continuing to shift as we move through different phases of the pandemic. So really here, I wanted to start with a message that we have repeated actually from the first weeks of the pandemic, which is that brands do have a very clear and positive role to play. And that is something that's both expected and welcomed by consumers. So firstly, we do see that people are looking for brands to take a leadership role. 3/4 of people want brands to be making a positive impact. And also 3/4 of people want brands to use their resources and influence to help people during the pandemic. And I think that help can be both on a societal level, but also it can be small things that make people's lives on a day-to-day basis a little bit easier and a little bit better. Secondly, we are still seeing that the majority of people are very happy for brands to still be advertising. Now, of course, we know that in the last 2 to 3 months, lots of brands have been reducing their advertising spend, but the evidence does suggest that in the second half of this year, ad spend will recover again, and it's good to know that audiences will welcome this. But of course, at the same time, it is going to become much more difficult to cut through and capture the audience's attention as our screens become much more crowded again in the second half of the year. So in this context, I think it becomes even more important to strike the right emotional chord with people at the right time. And of course, we know that emotional needs continue to evolve very, very quickly as we move through these different phases of the pandemic. So if we leverage the same market clustering approach that we used earlier in the presentation, And first of all, if we take market clusters 1 and 2, these are the countries that feel furthest away from normal and where life is still restricted to a certain extent. What we saw earlier in the pandemic with countries that were in this situation, boredom really was a key challenge for people in those countries, and therefore they were looking for brands to provide immediate fun and distraction. But now what we're seeing very clearly is the need for fairness and specifically price consistency taking precedence. And clearly that's a function of economic worries really taking hold. But in country clusters that are already edging closer towards normality, people are already looking towards the future. They're looking for brands to provide information and inspiration. So really that's a big opportunity for brands to expand the role that they're playing in people's lives, specifically in these leading edge countries. So picking up on this consumer need for inspiration, we've identified some fantastic examples of brands that really are leading the way with their communications and inspiring change. So these are brands that have been called out by consumers within our tracking program as brands that really are capturing their attention and impressing people. So the first example on the left is from Lifebuoy. Lifebuoy, of course, a personal care brand owned by Unilever. And Lifebuoy have taken a brand agnostic approach. So really they're encouraging people to wash their hands with any brand of soap and doing that for the greater good. That is something that has captured the attention and inspired consumers, as evidenced by some of the really rich verbatims that we're picking up in different countries across our tracking program. Now, of course, as the category leader, Lifebuoy can expect to benefit from this kind of category-oriented comms. But we think the bigger learning here is that Lifebuoy is succeeding by specifically addressing this emerging consumer need for inspiration. The second example we have is from Durex, a condom brand, and it's another fantastic example of a brand that is using this moment as an opportunity to inspire change and lead people towards a brighter future, a new normal that's better than what has come before. So we are seeing with this "Let's not go back to normal" campaign and this big idea that really is perfectly pitched for the mindset of audiences in these leading edge countries. Another example of brands, or in this case actually a group of brands who are inspiring change, has emerged in the beauty sector. So we are seeing innovative new ways for consumers to adapt to wearing face masks by dressing up and drawing attention to the eyes. So South Korea has been the epicenter for this innovation. We're seeing beauty bloggers and beauty professionals coming up with new trends and tutorials to guide and inspire the consumer in how to draw attention to the eyes and the brows, given that lips and cheeks are undercover. Of course, we are seeing that mainstream beauty businesses have been very, very quick to capitalize on these trends. So, for example, L'Oreal in China has reported that sales of eye makeup are growing faster than any other product category in China. And also we're seeing high-end conventional makeup brands like Anastasia Beverly Hills also looking to capitalize on these trends by launching electric colored eyeliners, something that traditionally has been the preserve of indie brands. So this is a great reminder that as consumers face new challenges, this presents a great opportunity for brands to innovate to meet these new needs and inspire change. Our last example comes from KFC, and I think this example really speaks brilliantly to the importance of brands continuing to be distinctive to ensure engagement in this current environment. So the KFC We're Back campaign features user-generated content from customers who have attempted to recreate KFC food at home during quarantine, and that's been accompanied by a social Rate My KFC challenge. So all of us on this call will have noticed that our screens recently have been filled with user-generated content style advertising from lots of different brands across lots of different categories. I think this is a trend that has been driven by, of course, the challenges that we have in shooting new advertising during this lockdown, but also I think the desire from brands to appear to be authentic and appear to be on the side of the consumer. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these efforts have been largely wasted, and that's because a lot of this user-generated content has lacked distinctiveness. It's really failed to capture the attention and really failed to effectively signpost the brand. Now, KFC have successfully avoided this trap by really drawing on and playing on a very distinctive brand territory. That is that KFC really is the kind of the only one and the original seasoned chicken brand out there. And also they're deploying KFC's unique brand of humour with some quite brutal social reviews of their customers' efforts. So very fun, very engaging, and crucially very distinctive. And I think that's going to become even more important as more advertisers return to wear in the second half of this year. So we wanted to finish by recapping some key themes from today and then detailing some of the specific implications for brands. So first of all, 5 key themes that we would like to reinforce from today's session. Firstly, we continue to see this rising acceptance of a long road to recovery ahead, but also we are seeing increasingly that this will not be a linear path forwards. There will be these setbacks and these disappointments along the way, and that's going to have a big impact on how consumers are feeling and adapting. Secondly, we are seeing that financial worries continue to be very top of mind. We are seeing the impact of the COVID-19 recession becoming a reality for many people, and actually 1/3 of people suffering an income decline. And this worry actually becomes even more pronounced as country restrictions are relaxed. In terms of sustainability, in the short term at least, it has been superseded by other concerns. So topics like hygiene, value, also things like social equality, these currently are higher on the consumer agenda, but we do expect this to be a short-term situation. And sustainability will become a priority again as we move towards later phases of the pandemic. Consumers continue to be cautious, and actually we are seeing people losing confidence in doing certain activities as safety concerns re-emerge and the reality of the experience becomes clear. And finally, we are continuing to see that emotional needs evolve as we move through different phases of the pandemic. And now specifically in many of our leading edge countries, we are seeing that there is a big opportunity for brands to provide both information and inspiration. So any communications that supports the greater good or inspires personal change is likely to resonate. So specifically, what does this all mean for brands and communications? Well, first of all, we are advising brands to pick their battles with purpose. So of course, there are lots of topics that consumers are engaging with at the moment, and brands should not be looking to engage across all fronts. Brands should be looking to focus their efforts on playing a role when they can do so both meaningfully and authentically. In the context of rising economic fears and this realization that the road to normality is going to be long, brands have to get that value equation right. And that means placing real focus on how you can make people's lives easier and better. We are seeing that sustainability is being superseded in the short term. It's not the primary concern for people right now. So in that context, we are advising clients to create a springboard for sustainability. We know that it will return, it will rise up the consumer agenda again as we move towards these later phases of the crisis. That means that brands should focus on getting themselves ready to activate against that when the time comes. We know that people are increasingly looking for information and inspiration. This is a huge opportunity for brand content right now to deliver against these needs and to really inspire change in positive ways. And finally, unfortunately, we know that the situation continues to be complex and it's changing very, very quickly. That means that, of course, brands have to stay close to these emerging needs and changing priorities, and then really be agile, adapt those strategies accordingly. So I think now is a good moment for us to pause and take some of the questions that you've been posting for us. So thank you to everyone who's been posting questions. We really appreciate that. So just looking at the first batch of questions that is coming through now. So first of all, we have a question specifically about Italy and Spain. So I think I will take the first question. So this question is that it was very interesting to see that Italy and Spain, 2 countries that were, of course, most severely impacted by COVID-19 in Europe, making such great strides on getting back to normal. So the question essentially is, what is driving this? So thanks for that question. Great observation. Something that we've discussed internally as a team, actually, because it does give us a little bit of hope that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Of course, Spain and Italy were two countries that unfortunately had very high numbers of cases, very high numbers of deaths, quite early on in the pandemic, actually. And also at the same time, they had some of the strictest lockdowns. But since then, since June, I think both countries have been able to ease their lockdowns quite significantly. So, for example, Spain lifted that state of emergency. We even saw in Spain that they're starting to welcome back foreign tourists, which is fantastic, and of course a critical contributor to GDP in Spain. In Italy, we've seen reports of cafes, parks, factories reopening again after 3 or 4 months of being closed down. Also something that's close to my heart, we've seen the football leagues restarting again in Spain and Italy. So I think all of this is just coming together to bring back a sense of normality to those two countries that were so severely hit by the pandemic quite early in this crisis. So we're really pleased to see that reflected in the growing confidence that we see amongst consumers. Okay, second question that's coming through relates to our country clusters. So Bish, I might pose this question to you if that's okay. So this person loved our country clusters, which is nice to see. They've asked us to elaborate a little bit more though on why we think household finances tend to become an even more important worry once countries fall into that third bucket, so that leading edge bucket. So Bish, could you expand on that for us?
Yeah, so yeah, glad they loved our clusters. I think what we saw and the hypothesis in this regard is essentially on the lines that, you can almost call it the evolution of the human survival instinct to a certain degree, because when you are in that first bucket that we call not ready, for example, where you still have a lot of restrictions in place, the virus is still pretty, increasing at a daily rate, a significant rate daily. People are primarily concerned about their physical survival and physical health. Now, we saw that in round one when we were at the peak of the pandemic, the whole we versus me phenomenon, and where consumers, people were saying that I need to ensure my family's physical safety. So that was the primal fear at play at that point of time, and it's still at play in the not ready markets right now. However, when people are moving into the third bucket, which is sort of leading edge markets, what we are seeing and where the hypothesis lies is that people are moving from that primal fear into a rational fear that, okay, I have gone past that fear of physical health and the bit around I have potentially avoided the virus. Now what? I need to think about my income streams. I need to think about where my sustainable and steady flow of income in the coming months and year, and hence that worry about the household finances becomes even more pronounced in the leading edge bucket than when you are in sort of the first group of not ready markets.
Great, thank you, Bish. Right, I think we've got time for one more question. This one relates to environmental concerns. So Bish, I might pose this one to you again, if that's okay. So this question relates to the data point we saw that people say they are concerned about the environment, but actually they're not talking about it much online or in social contexts. So why do we think this is happening?
Right. Yeah, clearly, if you ask anyone on the road, in a survey, on a questionnaire, everywhere, are you concerned about the environment? People will say, yes, I'm concerned about the environment. And it's a fair point, because we've seen the importance of sustainability and climate change and environmental-led topics really grow leaps and bounds over the last few years, be it worldwide movements, be it brand and government initiatives, be it white papers on the impact on the environment. Clearly, there was a lot of subject matter around the importance of looking after the environment itself. And if you looked at the number of consumers who were concerned about the environment, that was growing by leaps and bounds. Hence, it's not surprising that when we ask consumers, are you concerned about the environment? They say yes. But when it comes to the online behavior that our social team is tracking, what we see is a very clear, and I refer to this as noise in the system, that there are a lot of topics that people are talking about right now, be it about COVID-related topics around how it is impacting health, how it is impacting finances. People are talking about politics, about presidential elections, about Brexit in richest country as well, about the implications of Brexit. So clearly there is a lot of noise in the system, but it's a question of, that's why potentially sustainability has what we call has been superseded. But we do expect sustainability to come back to the forefront once we emerge from the new normal. So yes, it's not coming through on online conversations right now, but what we can certainly expect is as countries begin to emerge into the new normal, it will be back on the table as an important topic for consumers.
Thank you, Bish. Great. I think that's probably all the time we have for questions. So apologies to those whose questions we didn't get a chance to answer. We will send a written response to you as soon as we can. Now, though, I wanted to spend a little bit of time just reminding everyone that broadly with this program, we are striving to build it around our clients' key business questions. So that is why we were able to focus on sustainability as a hot topic this month, for example. So we just wanted to mention that following this session, your Metrics Labs teams are going to be getting in touch. They will share the report with you, but also they will ask you for your help in shaping the future of this program. So which topics are you wrestling with as we enter this new phase of the crisis? So look out for that contact from your Metrics Lab team. For now, though, I think I will close the session. So thank you very, very much for joining us. We really hope you can take this learning back into your business to guide the actions that are being taken. And we really look forward to seeing you next time. So until then, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.